Boris Johnson's proposal to row back on parts of last year's withdrawal agreement is both an insurance and a deterrent, as Brussels has broken rules to maliciously target Britain in the past, the former director of special projects at Boat Leave has claimed. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is pressing ahead with plans to publish new laws which would annul parts of last year's Brexit withdrawal agreement, despite a Tory backlash spearheaded by his predecessor, Theresa May. Today, the government is expected to outline the controversial legislation that will give themselves the powers to limit checks and EU influence in Northern Ireland in the event that no trade deal can be struck between the UK and EU by the end of the transition period. Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, admitted the legislation does break international law in limited ways, and the head of the Government Legal Service, Jonathan Jones, resigned over the issue. Ministers will allow MPs at least 4 days to debate the legislation on the floor of the Commons. Ministers will claim there is precedent for breaking international law, including during Canada's moves to legalize cannabis. In a recent CapEx report, though, Lee Rotherham, the former director at Special Projects at Boat Leave, argued any safeguards clause that ends up before Parliament will have been included for a good reason, as it is both an insurance and a deterrent. The prominent Eurosceptic claimed there are plenty of warning signs to alert us not to rely on blind trust, particularly because Brussels has blatantly broken rules to maliciously target the UK in the past. He explained, it was odd in particular to see Sir John Major as such a partisan of remaining in the EU, after enduring the gross abuse of health and safety clauses being miscited to get around his social chapter opt-outs. The same trick was still being used 2 decades later to allow the Commission a legislative foothold in North Sea production, after a range of attempts through other treaty clauses had failed. The most celebrated abuse has been relatively recent, with the disaster clause being twisted during the Eurozone crisis to provide a legal basis for intervention, while forcing the opt-out countries to stump up billions.